I thought our MACV-SOG unit was the pinnacle of stealth, the absolute elite, quieter than silence itself. We ran deep recon into Laos, Cambodia, stomped through the DMZ. We operated in six-man teams, carried suppressors, knew how to vanish into thin air and strike so hard the enemy didn't even know where it came from. They called us shadows and, damn it, I believed it. Believed it right up until the day we were assigned a joint operation with an Australian SAS patrol. We met at a forward base outside Da Nang, and it felt like a bad joke. No crisp salutes, no chatter. Just 5 men in tattered uniforms with faces carved from stone. Their gear looked bare bones by our standards. No extra pouches, no protruding antennas, no rank insignias. One of them just slid his gaze over us, gave a short nod, and went back to his canteen. A heavy silence hung in the air, as if they had already started the mission in their minds, and we were the ones hopelessly late. We moved out at dawn. The jungle was thick, the air soaked in suffocating heat. My team held formation, scanning sectors, weapons ready. Every 30 minutes we made a short halt. Check azimuth, send a quiet radio signal, confirm position. A routine honed to automaticity. But the Australians, they didn't utter a word. They didn't even stop. And somewhere around the 4th hour of patrol, we realized with horror. They were gone. No sound of footsteps, no snapping twig. They had simply dissolved like smoke in the wind. We panicked, just a little, but that sticky chill ran down our spines. We thought we'd lost them, that they'd broken contact. But when we reached the rally point, they were already there. Dug in, calm, watching our approach with a look that said they'd been waiting for an hour. In that moment, the realization hit me. We thought we were ghosts. We were wrong. They were the ghosts. On paper, we were equals. Elite reconnaissance, hardened by months in the bush, trusted with missions of the highest complexity. Brothers in arms under different flags. But I never understood how vast the chasm between us was until I saw them in action. My team moved to a rhythm built over dozens of raids, intervals, hand signals, scheduled radio checks. Each of us hauled nearly 60 pounds. Comms, claymore mines, spare mags, maps, morphine, batteries. We were light compared to infantry, but still loaded. The Australians? They moved like they came from a different war entirely. Their kit was stripped to the bone. No visible radios, no chatter, no backward glances to check spacing. Just a slow, creeping advance, like the movement of a single organism. It wasn't a squad, it was a pack. They didn't stop when we stopped. They didn't rest when we rested. They just flowed forward, quiet, purposeful, always slightly ahead, always out of sight. We'd catch up to them at a rest halt and find them already sitting in a perimeter defense, barrels facing out. No one spoke. They weren't even breathing hard. I quietly asked one of them if they were worried about losing each other without comms. He looked at me with a long gaze, then replied, quote, "Zero quote." That phrase stuck in my head. We in SOG relied on technology, encrypted radios, signal mirrors, backup batteries. We believed that if everything went to hell, we'd call in extraction or gunships. The SAS relied on nothing. Their radio man didn't even carry a handset in plain sight. When I asked, he just patted a folded message card in his pocket. It wasn't bravado. It was pure, icy practicality. Their entire doctrine was built on not being found, not needing support, and not engaging unless it was a matter of life and death. We were taught to be fast, hit hard, and leave clean. They were taught to disappear completely. Over time, this started to weigh on us. Not in a bad way, but in a sobering one. We weren't the quietest guys in the jungle, not even close. On the second day, one of my teammates whispered to me, quote 2, "It felt true. Same jungle, same mission. But somewhere along the way, they stopped trying to conquer the terrain and simply became part of it. And we were still guests. Armed, dangerous, but visible. The moment of truth came in the afternoon of the first day. The heat was so dense the uniform clung to your back, and the rifle felt twice as heavy. My team halted to adjust course and send a short radio burst to base, Standard procedure we'd done hundreds of times. We were good at it, efficient, professional. But while we crouched there, whispering into the handset, I noticed something unsettling. The Australians were gone. Not ahead, not behind, not on the flanks. Just evaporated. At first, I thought they had flanked us to take position, maybe found a better path through the brush. But I scanned the trees and saw not the slightest sign of their passing. No disturbed vine, no bent stalk of elephant grass, no shifting shadows. The jungle stood perfectly still. And that's a strange feeling, being surrounded by silence that doesn't belong to you. A murmur of anxiety ran through us. Losing a partner patrol deep in enemy rear is not just unprofessional, it's deadly dangerous. If contact starts, we must know where our allies are. One wrong shot, and you kill a friendly. And if the Australians had been compromised, we would have heard movement, a scuffle, a shot. But there was nothing. We moved forward, more cautious now, staring at the ground searching for tracks. After an hour of slow movement, we reached the designated observation point, a small rise over a narrow NVA trail. And that's when the real shock hit us. The SAS were already there, already dug in, already camouflaged. They were watching the trail through slits in the vegetation. One of them raised a finger to his lips without even turning fully toward us. The gesture was so natural, as if he were reminding children not to wake a sleeping baby. We froze. How did they get here before us? How did they pass by without a sound? How did 5 men with rifles slip through the noisiest terrain in Southeast Asia without disturbing a leaf? I crawled up to their commander and whispered, "When did you arrive?" He didn't look at me, didn't smile. He just murmured, almost bored, "Before you started your radio check?" That was the moment I realized we were doing reconnaissance wrong. Not unsafely, not ineffectively, just loudly. We relied on tools instead of instincts. We thought silence was when you didn't talk. They showed us silence is when you don't exist. From that moment, all my assumptions about jungle warfare seemed like excess baggage to be discarded and forgotten. We weren't studying the SAS. We were being shown what mastery looked like. We were taught radio was life. Without it, you're cut off and vulnerable. In MACV-SOG, everything hinged on comms. Silent bursts, emergency frequencies, codes. If a man was hit, the first thing we did was key the mic. I kept watching the Australians, expecting one of them to break the silence with a quiet murmur into a handset. But it didn't happen. They didn't speak. They didn't signal. They moved without words, fluidly, synchronously, like a school of fish reacting to a single invisible current. At first, I thought they had some high-tech comms we hadn't seen. But later, their radio man just tapped his chest pocket, he said dryly. It wasn't fatalism, it was preparation. They didn't plan to be rescued. They planned not to be found in the first place. Their coordination was born of repetition, of shared instinct, of a cohesion hammered into the subconscious that was alien to most American units. We trained hard, but we trusted gear. They trained until they could execute the mission blind, deaf, and mute. At one point, my team leader whispered to me, quote 7, "I didn't know, but then I realized." It was in how they moved, a weight shift, a finger on a barrel, a blink held a second longer. Their entire system was built on pre-mission rehearsal and combat intuition. They didn't need to speak because every scenario had been walked through before stepping into the jungle. They didn't stop to pull out maps or compasses. The patrol leader would just glance at a tree, a rock, or a slope, and adjust course by a couple of degrees. Not a word. No confirmations. The rest followed without hesitation, like they were connected by an invisible thread. And when they stopped, it was instant. No stumbling, no domino effect of men catching up. One froze. All froze. I had never seen anything like it. We moved well. They moved like the wind. And all this without a single radio signal. That night, at our temporary site, I sat next to their commander and asked, "Aren't you worried? Without comms, if something goes wrong?" He gently interrupted me. "If something goes wrong," he said, "we either fix it silently, or we shouldn't have been here at all." There was no ego in his voice, no arrogance, just calm certainty. In that moment, I realized they aren't just good at being quiet. Silence was their religion. The next day, we tracked a suspected NVA supply route. Intel said small convoys passed twice a week, usually unguarded, carrying ammo or rice. Our mission: observation only. Verify usage, estimate strength, clock the time. No contact, no shooting. For us, that meant taking a position, watching for 24 hours and pulling back. The SAS approached it differently. They scouted the area the evening before and dissolved into positions before first light. They didn't just watch from afar. They crawled so close to the trail I could barely distinguish them in the bushes, even though I knew where they lay. One soldier burrowed under a rotten log, frozen, only eyes visible through a layer of wet leaves. Another merged with a clay bank. I looked at them and thought, this isn't reconnaissance. This is predation. When the enemy couriers appeared, a line of 5 men with crates and a rusty bicycle, the SAS didn't raise their rifles. They didn't flinch. They didn't even blink. They just watched. Let them pass. Memorized faces, tread patterns, load weights, stride rhythms. And then vanished. By the time we regrouped, the Australians already had a full profile of the enemy movement. Weight estimates, belt buckle details, even markings on rice sacks, all gathered without a sound, without pulling a trigger. When it was time to leave, we began our usual withdrawal, cautious but hurried, sweeping tracks. But the Australians moved as if they had never been there. They stepped on roots, crawled over rocks, walked in creek beds. Every rest spot was sanitized, every print in the mud covered, even their spit was buried. When we passed back over the trail, I couldn't even find where they had lain. It was eerie. When I asked one of them, quote, 11, quote, he answered simply, quote, 12, quote, that was their doctrine in one sentence. We often operated assuming speed and violence were our insurance. Their insurance was invisibility, not just visual, but environmental, psychological. They avoided firefights not because they were afraid. They avoided them because they didn't need them. The enemy couldn't fight what it didn't know was there. No one ends up in MACV-SOG by accident. You are selected, broken, rebuilt. You become a problem solver, a survivor. So admitting someone does your job better, that's hard. It cuts deep. And that's exactly what we felt after 3 days in the bush with the Australian SAS. Not envy, not rivalry, but a creeping, quiet humility. Like you've been talking loudly in a library your whole life and no one told you until today. At first, we chalked the difference up to style. They're slower, lighter, more patient, a national quirk. But by the end of the mission, ignoring it became impossible. They operated on a higher plane of discipline. They didn't look tougher. They didn't brag. But they made fewer mistakes. Their presence in the jungle was measured in grams and decibels, not bravado. And while we whispered over maps, they relied on muscle memory and trust. It wasn't easy to admit. I remember one of our veterans muttering at a halt, quote, 13. It wasn't self-pity, it was a revelation. The Australians didn't try to humiliate us. They never corrected us. They just moved as they always moved. And it was their example that made us feel naked. By the 4th day, we started changing. We shed extra weight, skipped a comms window, spaced out more deliberately. We adopted their habits, how they crouched in the rain, how they masked scent, how they slowed their blinking. We spoke less and watched more. And strangely, the jungle started to feel different. Not less dangerous, but less hostile. We began to merge with it, not push through it. That night, an old SAS sergeant told me, I wrote that in my notebook and underlined it twice. We were trying to win. They were trying not to be there at all. And in reconnaissance, that is the highest form of success. When we exfiltrated, it was quiet. No fireworks, no shooting. Just a silent rendezvous, a quick lift, and 5 Australian silhouettes dissolving into the trees before the rotors kicked up dust. They didn't wave. They didn't say goodbye. But we flew away, changed. Back at base, the usual post-op chatter died down. No one bragged. We unpacked slower, sat in the debrief longer. There was a weight in the room, not of shame, but of reflection. The real lesson wasn't what the SAS did, but what they didn't do. No wasted movement, no wasted speech, no ego. We started rethinking everything. Our team cut gear weight by a third. Radios became a backup, not an umbilical cord. We started plotting routes along natural cover. One of our guys began practicing stillness drills, lying in bushes for hours. We rehearsed movement like choreography. We learned to wait longer and break the American instinct that action equals success. The biggest shift happened 2 weeks later. We had intel on an enemy radio site near the Laotian border. Old us would have stormed it at night. New us tried something else. We went in low and slow, spent extra time on scent discipline. We sat silent for 48 hours, and when it came time to confirm the target, we were so close we could read the serial number on the enemy radio. We didn't fire a single shot, and that felt like the cleanest win of our lives. Rumors spread. Other teams asked how we did it. I told the truth. We stopped playing special forces and started acting like we weren't there. Some SOG guys asked to attach to Australian patrols. Not to lead, but to observe, to learn. Because what we saw wasn't a technique, it was a philosophy, where survival is earned not by dominance, but by absence. That lesson stayed with me forever. Even years later, when the jungle was far behind. Some ghosts teach you to fight, others teach you to disappear. Years later, I was giving a lecture at a special recon course. Young candidates listened about deep raids. At the end, someone asked, "What is the most important lesson you learned in Vietnam?" I didn't hesitate. I said, I wasn't talking about MACV-SOG. I was talking about the Australians. These 5 men with sunburned faces didn't just move differently, they thought differently. They didn't wait to be hunted. They crafted their presence so perfectly, they left no scent, no sound, no reason for the enemy to look twice. In a war where detection was a death sentence, this was survival raised to an art form. Even their mistakes were quiet. I remember an Australian snapping a twig. He didn't freeze or curse. He just sank lower into the undergrowth and waited 3 minutes, as if acknowledging the mistake would make it real. We were the best America had. But after watching those Australians, we understood something deeper. Perfection isn't always loud. Sometimes it's invisible. And it changed us. We stopped measuring success in body counts. We started measuring it by what we saw, what we avoided, and what we learned while remaining unnoticed. When asked where I learned this, I smiled and said, from Australians who stopped being soldiers and became terrain. They weren't supermen. They were just dedicated, disciplined, and focused on mastery. Masters of restraint in a war that rewarded aggression. That's why I remember them not for what they did, but for how they made us feel. Like children among phantoms. Like students before teachers we didn't know we needed. Like ghosts trying to understand what it really means to be unseen. We thought we were the best. Then we saw those who didn't need to be seen to win. And we never looked at the jungle the same way again.